My name is Avery Collins, and for most of my life, I believed that loyalty, love, and legacy were things you could count on, especially within your own family. I grew up in a modest but beautiful home on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, where the hills roll like waves and the air always smelled faintly of pine needles and wood smoke. My childhood was shaped largely by my grandfather, Samuel Collins, the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands and heal anything with a story. He wasn't just my grandfather, he was my anchor. My parents had divorced when I was 7, and my mom, juggling 3 jobs, had to send me to live with Grandpa Sam for a few years. He took me in like I was his own daughter. He taught me how to drive, how to hammer a nail, how to pick tomatoes without bruising them, and how to play chess without mercy. Every time I struggled through college or scraped together rent after graduation, he was there, never with cash, but always with wisdom, encouragement, and a casserole. And when I landed my first real job as a copy editor for a publishing house in Charlotte, he called me every Sunday like clockwork, asking how the big city life was treating me. Family was everything to him. At least, that's what I thought. On paper, the Collins family wasn't large. Just me, my grandfather, and my 2 older cousins, Mason and Jessica. Both were the children of my father's siblings, both older than me, and both always slightly removed.
Polished.
Strategic. We'd never been particularly close. Holiday dinners felt more like business meetings whenever they were around, everyone pretending to enjoy each other's company while secretly calculating what piece of the family pie they'd one day be entitled to. Still, I believed what Grandpa Sim always said, blood's thick, but love is thicker. In the end, love wins. That's what I clung to when he passed away last November. He had a stroke in his sleep, no warning, no goodbyes. I found out in the middle of a Tuesday meeting when Jessica sent a cold group text. Grandpa's gone. The lawyer will be contacting everyone about the will. Jess. No emotion. No call. Just a text. The funeral was small, almost too quiet. The service was at the same Baptist church he'd attended for 40 years. I wore a navy blue dress and stood in the second pew, watching as Mason adjusted his Rolex every few minutes like the burial was cutting into his stock portfolio. Jessica cried, but I wasn't convinced they were real tears. She didn't even speak during the service, just clutched a tiny designer purse like it was her lifeline. I gave the eulogy. I told everyone about the time Grandpa Sam built me a treehouse from salvaged wood, or how he once drove 6 hours just to bring me soup when I had the flu in college. I didn't cry when I spoke. I couldn't. My grief sat too deep, lodged somewhere under my ribs like a weight I couldn't move. The will reading was said a week after the funeral. I remember driving to Morgan and Bryce law offices with a stomach full of nerves. Not because I was worried, I truly wasn't. Grandpa had told me once, Avery, when I'm gone, you won't have to worry about anything. I've made sure of that. I believed him. I stepped into the conference room and nodded to Mr. Bryce, the gray-haired family attorney who'd known us since I was a kid. Jessica sat across the table, immaculate in a cream blazer. Mason arrived late, of course, slipping in with the scent of expensive cologne and zero apology. Mr. Bryce began to read. His voice was flat, procedural. It started with a few charitable donations, then minor items, his old truck to Mason, the antique tea set to Jessica. Then came the real estate, the lake house, the family land, his savings, the trust fund. It all went to Jessica and Mason. Every single asset. When my name finally came up, it was for one thing only. To my granddaughter, Avery Collins, I leave my pocket watch and a collection of old letters stored in my study. That was it. No explanation. No mention of the conversations we'd had. No recognition of the bond we shared. No trace of the promises he'd made. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I stared at Mr. Bryce, waiting for him to laugh or flip to the next page. But he didn't. He just looked at me over his glasses, his face unreadable. Jessica gave me a sideways glance, almost smug. Mason leaned back in his chair like he already owned the world. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my hands numb in my lap. I managed to murmur a thank you and walked out before the walls collapsed around me. The next few days were a blur of disbelief and growing rage. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. How could he leave me with nothing? Not even the house I helped him renovate or the workshop where we built birdhouses every summer. It didn't make sense. None of it did. That was when I remembered something, a conversation from 2 years ago. We were sitting on the porch swing and Grandpa said, "There's more than one kind of document that tells the truth. You just have to know where to look." At the time, I thought he was talking about family history or some old photograph. But now it echoed differently. Like a riddle. Like a clue I hadn't understood until now. And that was the moment I knew. Something wasn't right. Something was missing. And I wasn't going to let this be the end. The day after the will reading, I returned to Grandpa Sam's house alone. It still smelled like cedar and cinnamon, his favorite combination of pipe tobacco and old books. The air inside was quiet, too quiet, like the house was holding its breath along with me. I didn't come for the pocket watch. I came for the letters. They were in the study, exactly where Mr. Bryce had said. A large brown box sat on the bottom shelf of Grandpa's old roll-top desk, wrapped with string and a tag that simply read, "For Avery." My hands trembled as I untied it. Inside were dozens, maybe hundreds, of handwritten notes, letters, receipts, even napkins with scribbled thoughts. Some were addressed to my grandmother, some to old friends, but the majority were letters to me. Letters he'd written and never sent. I sat there for hours, reading letter after letter. They were filled with memories, advice, stories from his youth, and notes about the family legacy. One letter caught my attention more than the others. It was dated just 2 months before he passed. "If anything ever happens to me suddenly, just know that things are not as they seem. I've made arrangements. But not everything was done the way I intended. Look deeper. Not everyone has your best interests at heart, even if they share your blood." I reread that paragraph over and over, each word sinking in like a stone dropped into still water. I knew it then. He had tried to protect me, but something had gone terribly wrong. Still, what could I do? I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't rich. All I had were some vague warnings and a box of old letters. That night, I called Mr. Bryce and asked to speak with him in private. We met the next morning in his office. Dim lighting, legal books stacked like fortresses, and a faint hum of a ticking wall clock that made the silence between us feel even heavier. "I don't mean to be disrespectful," I said carefully, "but I don't believe Grandpa Sam intended to leave me out of his estate. Something feels off." Mr. Bryce sighed and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Avery, I understand how painful this must be, but everything was filed according to the documents I was provided. The will I read was dated and notarized 5 months before his death." Was it the only will? His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Because I remember something Grandpa said. He mentioned making arrangements. I think there might be another document, something more recent." For a moment, Mr. Bryce said nothing. Then he leaned forward. "Samuel did ask me about updating his will about 3 months before his passing. He never followed through with sending the revisions. Said he was having second thoughts about certain clauses. But I never received a final copy. If there was one, it wasn't submitted through my office." That wasn't confirmation, but it wasn't a denial either. That night, I called my childhood friend Tessa, now a paralegal in Raleigh. She'd always had a sharp eye and a zero-tolerance policy for injustice. I told her everything. "There's a chance the original will was changed," I explained, "but either it wasn't filed, or it was buried." "Buried how?" "Maybe literally," I half-joked. She didn't laugh. "If he made changes but didn't file them through Bryce," she said slowly, "they might still exist. If you find a newer document and can prove it's legitimate, signed, dated, ideally notarized, you could challenge the existing will." That was all the encouragement I needed. The next weekend, I went back to the house again, this time with gloves, a flashlight, and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I started with the study, tearing through drawers, files, old folders, searching for anything that looked legal. Nothing. Then the attic. Dust, boxes, holiday decorations. Still nothing. Then I remembered the workshop. Grandpa had built that place from scratch. It wasn't just a space for tools. It was his sanctuary. He kept things there that he didn't want others to touch. Private things. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Dust swirled in the shafts of sunlight beaming through the windows. The air smelled like oil, with shavings and rusted time. I searched the drawers first, then behind the tool wall. Still nothing. Then I saw it. Just above the workbench, a narrow wooden beam in the ceiling that didn't match the others. It was newer, cleaner, like it had been replaced. My pulse quickened. I climbed onto the bench, pressing the beam gently. It moved slightly. A compartment. Inside was a sealed envelope. It was labeled in thick black ink. Final will. Do not file without Avery. I could barely breathe. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were 6 typed pages. It was clearly dated, 3 weeks before Grandpa died. It listed my full name as the sole recipient of his house, the land, and half of his savings. Mason and Jessica were to split the remainder. The signature was unmistakably his. And in the bottom corner, the notary's seal was faint but present. I sat on the bench in shock. My hands were shaking. All this time, I hadn't been forgotten. I had been robbed. And someone had known exactly what they were doing. Tessa confirmed everything after I scanned and sent her copies. It was real. It was legal. And most importantly, it changed everything. But before I could bring it to court, I had one more thing to do. I needed to find out who kept it hidden, who made sure this will was never found. And I had a sinking feeling I already knew exactly who it was. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than grief, conviction. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being emotional or entitled like Jessica had implied with her passive-aggressive smirks. I had proof, and now, I had a mission. The next day, I met with Tessa in person at a quiet cafe in downtown Raleigh. She had printed copies of the hidden will, highlighted the legal points, and even pre-drafted a letter of intent to challenge the existing estate distribution. Her eyes sparkled with a kind of excitement that only a righteous battle could spark. Legally, she said, sipping her black coffee, you're in a strong position. This document is valid.
Signed.
Dated. Notarized. The only issue is the delay. You'll need to explain why it wasn't filed right away. Because someone hid it, I said. On purpose. She nodded. Exactly. And that's where things get messy. The law was one thing. Family was another. I knew that bringing this forward meant war. Jessica and Mason wouldn't just roll over. Especially not Jessica. She was the one who stood to lose the most. Mason might whine or threaten, but Jessica? She'd come with claws. Still, I couldn't back down.
Not now.
Not after everything Grandpa Sam had done to make things right before he passed. I took a week off work. I couldn't focus on editing manuscripts when my real-life plotline felt like something ripped out of a courtroom drama. I drove back to Asheville and booked a motel near the courthouse. I'd need to be nearby once the legal wheels started turning. I delivered the document to Mr. Bryce myself. When I handed him the envelope, he looked at it like it was radioactive. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In Grandpa's workshop. Hidden in the ceiling." He labeled it clearly, said not to file it without me. He slowly flipped through the pages. His face paled as he reached the final signature. "I can't deny it," he muttered. "This changes everything." I expected him to resist. But instead, he picked up the phone and called the county clerk. "We'll need to initiate a probate challenge," he said, turning away from me. "Yes, a secondary will has been discovered." "No, it wasn't previously submitted." "Yes, it's notarized." When he hung up, he looked me square in the eyes. "Prepare yourself, Avery. Once this gets out, they're coming for you." And they did. The same night, I got a call from Jessica. Her voice was clipped, icy. "I hear you're trying to undo Grandpa's will," she said. "I'm doing what's right," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "What's right?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think crawling around in the attic and playing detective gives you the right to overturn legal proceedings?" "No, Jessica. The signed and notarized document gives me the right." A beat of silence. Then her voice dropped to a hiss. "You're going to regret this."
Click.
The next day, my car was keyed outside the motel. A clean, jagged scratch ran across the driver's door. No witnesses. No cameras. No apology. It didn't stop me. I filed the official petition to reopen the estate case. Tessa helped me draft a statement explaining the timeline of events, how I discovered the will, and why I believed it had been intentionally hidden. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. That left me time, but not peace. I couldn't sleep. My stomach twisted with anxiety. What if the judge didn't accept it? What if the notary couldn't be located? What if someone tried to accuse me of forging the will? Then something strange happened. 2 days before the hearing, I received an envelope at my motel. No return address. Inside was a folded sheet of paper.
Typed.
Anonymous. Check the security footage from Morgan and Bryce the week before Grandpa Sam died. Someone came in. Someone filed something they shouldn't have. My heart pounded. Who had sent this? And what exactly were they implying? I rushed to the law office, but Mr. Bryce said their camera system only kept footage for 30 days. Standard protocol, he claimed. I wasn't sure if he was lying or telling the truth. But the letter had done something important. It shifted my focus. I began digging deeper into who had access to the law office around that time. That's when I remembered something Tessa had said during our first call. If someone altered or replaced the will, it would have needed access to Bryce's files. Or to Sam's home. I dug through my grandfather's mail logs and found something odd. Jessica had signed for a FedEx package addressed to Grandpa just 11 days before his death. The package was from a document courier service. The timing was too coincidental. I knew what I had to do. At the pretrial hearing, I submitted the new will and a timeline of evidence suggesting foul play. The judge listened carefully. So did Jessica and Mason, who both showed up in sleek suits and smug silence. Mr. Bryce, under oath, admitted that he had briefly left the office unlocked the week before Grandpa Sam's death. A quick coffee run, he said. That was enough to plant doubt. The judge scheduled a full hearing. And now the stakes were sky high. Not just legally, but emotionally. I had become the black sheep, the troublemaker, the one willing to disrupt the family's illusion of harmony. Old relatives stopped answering my calls. Mason posted a passive-aggressive rant on Facebook about entitled people who steal from the dead. But I didn't care, because I knew the truth. And more than anything, I wanted the world to know it too. What began as a whisper of suspicion had now become a full-blown legal war. And I was ready to fight. The courthouse was a squat, red brick building that smelled like floor wax and faded history. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived early, too early. I sat in the hallway, knees bouncing, hands cold despite the heat wave outside. Tessa joined me at 8:45 a.m., dressed in a navy blue suit and confidence. "You ready to shake a family tree until the rotten fruit falls out?" she asked with a half smile. I nodded, but inside I was on fire. At 9 a.m., we entered courtroom 2B. Jessica was already there, sitting with her high-powered attorney, a man who looked like he billed by the syllable. Mason sat 2 rows behind her, scrolling his phone like this was a minor inconvenience before brunch. The judge, Honorable Lisa McIntyre, entered with a soft thud of her gavel. Her eyes were sharp, her posture straighter than steel. "We're here today for a petition to admit a secondary will into probate for the estate of Samuel L. Collins," she began. "Petitioner Avery Collins, please present your claim." Tessa stood and began our opening. She presented the notarized will, explained its timeline, and outlined the suspicious circumstances under which the original will had seemingly disappeared. She spoke clearly and powerfully, her voice never cracking. Then it was Jessica's attorney's turn. He objected to the validity of the document. "This supposed final will was never submitted through the proper legal channels," he said, lips tight. "It was found in an unsecured location with no direct witnesses. For all we know, it could have been planted." That's when I stood. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Judge McIntyre eyed me. "You may speak briefly, Miss Collins." I cleared my throat, then locked eyes with Jessica. My grandfather raised me. I wasn't just a granddaughter. He called me his shadow. We built this life together. And he made it clear more than once that he intended for me to have that home, that land. He told me to look deeper if anything ever seemed wrong. And when I did, I found this will. I placed the sealed envelope on the evidence table. Jessica shifted in her seat. The envelope was labeled in his handwriting. The signature is real. The notary exists and has submitted a sworn affidavit confirming she met with him just weeks before he died. That caught the judge's attention. Jessica's attorney turned to her. Quietly, urgently. And that's when Jessica snapped. She stood without being asked, voice rising like boiling water.
He was senile.
He didn't know what he was doing that late in life. He forgot things, he rambled. But he remembered to hire a notary? The judge asked coldly. Jessica blinked. He remembered to label the envelope, sign it, and stash it where he knew only someone he trusted would look. Silence. And then, the twist. Tessa stood again. Your Honor, we would like to submit a statement that arrived anonymously to the petitioner. It suggested there may have been unauthorized access to Mr. Collins' legal documents prior to his passing. The judge raised an eyebrow. Go on. Tessa handed her a printed email. The law office's security footage has since been erased, but we traced the FedEx record that shows a document courier delivered something to Mr. Collins' home 11 days before his death. The recipient? Jessica Collins. All eyes turned. Jessica flushed red. That was just a financial form he needed to sign. Strange, Tessa said, because the delivery receipt lists the sender as a document reproduction service, one often used to duplicate or overwrite existing legal paperwork. Judge McIntyre leaned forward. Miss Collins, she said, her tone shifting, are you aware of any attempt to replace your grandfather's will in the final weeks before his passing? Jessica's eyes darted. She opened her mouth, closed it. Finally, she said, I was just trying to protect the family legacy. He was making decisions based on emotion, on guilt. He was going to give everything to Avery just because she spent time with him in his old age. Because I loved him. I shot back, anger breaking through my restraint. Not for his money. Not for some future payout. The judge held up a hand. That's enough. I've heard what I need. She called a recess. 20 minutes later, we were called back in. Judge McIntyre took her time, adjusting her glasses and looking at the courtroom as if weighing the entire Collins legacy in her mind. It is the opinion of this court, she finally said, that the secondary will discovered by Miss Collins is both valid and legally binding. The court finds no evidence of fraud or coercion on her part. The will shall be entered into probate, and the estate will be distributed accordingly. Jessica gasped. Mason let out a curse under his breath. The judge wasn't done. Furthermore, this court recommends that the district attorney review the circumstances under which the prior will was prioritized to investigate potential suppression of legal documentation. In short, Jessica might face criminal charges. As the gavel came down, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, relieved, numb, and a little broken. Because even when you win against your family, it doesn't feel like victory. As we stepped out of the courtroom, Jessica brushed past me, her eyes filled with venom. This isn't over, she spat. I didn't respond. She was right, it wasn't over. But for the first time, I had something no one could take from me. The truth. I sat on the hardwood floor of my dad's old office, surrounded by boxes of forgotten files, ledgers, and dusty books. My fingers were blistered from digging through stacks that hadn't seen the light of day in years. I hadn't showered in 2 days. I was running on caffeine, desperation, and some deep, primal sense that something had been left behind, something that would prove I hadn't imagined the look in my father's eyes when he said, "You'll be okay, Morgan." I made sure of it. That sentence had haunted me ever since the will reading. My cousin Scott had gotten everything. The house, the business, the stocks, even Dad's classic Mustang. I, Morgan Taylor, his only daughter, got nothing. The attorney had read the will with robotic detachment, not even glancing up when I gasped. My father had loved me. I wasn't just imagining that. He would never cut me out unless something was horribly wrong. That's why I was here now, in his locked office. The one room in the house Scott hadn't bothered to clean out yet. He thought there was nothing in it but junk. I knew better. After 3 nights of scouring, I nearly gave up until I saw it, a folder tucked inside the back of a hollowed-out law textbook. My heart stopped. It was labeled in my dad's handwriting. Morgan, if something happens. My hands shook as I pulled it out. Inside was a notarized letter, a copy of an amended will dated just 8 months before his passing, and a flash drive. I read the letter first. My father explained everything. He wrote that he feared Scott and his older brother Lucas had been manipulating him. He'd found out they'd been forging his signature on financial documents, and he'd changed his will to reflect that. He named me as the sole beneficiary of his estate. The flash drive, he said, had backups of emails, video recordings of conversations with his lawyer, and even audio of him confronting Scott. The amended will was signed, notarized, and dated, very clearly after the previous one. I sat there, stunned, the document trembling in my hands. My dad had protected me. He just hadn't lived long enough to make sure it reached the right people. The next morning, I walked into Harper, Lansing, and Moore, the same law office where my father's official will had been read. When I placed the folder on the conference room table and said, "I believe this changes everything," the room went silent. The senior partner, Mr. Lansing, adjusted his glasses and leafed through the pages, his face turning pale as he examined the notarized dates. This is real," he said slowly. "Why wasn't this presented at the initial reading?" "I found it in my dad's office." Hidden. He didn't question my story. The legal evidence spoke for itself. The amended will clearly superseded the previous one, and the audio files on the flash drive confirmed that my father was lucid, aware, and determined to protect me. My cousin's scam was unraveling in real time, and I could almost feel the universe tilting back into balance. It wasn't over yet, not legally, but for the first time since my father's death, I didn't feel powerless. I had something stronger than grief now. I had proof. The courtroom smelled like old wood and colder intentions. I sat straight-backed beside my attorney, Rachel Donnelly, a woman with the voice of velvet and a mind sharper than barbed wire. She'd gone through the documents I'd found with surgical precision, checking and rechecking every timestamp, signature, and file on the flash drive. The moment she confirmed their legitimacy, she looked at me with a quiet fire in her eyes and said, "We're going to bury them with the truth." Scott was seated just a few feet away, dressed in a tailored navy suit like he was some polished executive. He didn't look at me. Neither did Lucas, who sat behind him with a fake solemnity that I now saw for what it was, performance. For years, I had mistaken their charisma for charm. Now I knew better. It had always been about greed. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I glanced at the bench and tried to breathe through the weight pressing against my ribs. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about my father, about respect, about being seen. Rachel began by calmly presenting the notarized amended will. She outlined the timeline with clarity. My father had discovered Scott and Lucas's fraud, had spoken to a new lawyer privately, and had officially changed his will to reflect his intentions. He had named me his sole heir, leaving a modest amount to charity and nothing for the 2 men who had lied to him. Then came the flash drive. Rachel played the audio clips for the court. First, a shaky but clear recording of my father confronting Scott. "You forged my signature, Scott. I saw the transaction history. I trusted you with the books, my mistake. Uncle Jim, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. I've already changed the will. Morgan deserves better than what you 2 tried to pull." The courtroom was silent. You could hear the rustle of jackets, the tightening of jaws. And when the video played, grainy security footage of Dad and his lawyer finalizing the updated will, dated just months before his death, there was nothing left to dispute. Scott tried to object, claiming the documents were planted, that I had motivated reasons to fabricate everything. But the notary who signed the amended will was called in as a witness. An elderly man with a weathered face and eyes like granite, he stated under oath that he'd witnessed the signing personally. that my father had seemed calm, clear-headed, and absolutely determined. Rachel leaned in during cross and asked him, was there any indication Mr. Taylor was under duress or confused? None, he said. He was clear. In fact, I remember him saying, if something happens to me, this is what I want honored. My daughter deserves it all. I remember it because he looked me right in the eye when he said it. The judge's gavel echoed like thunder when she overruled Scott's objections. She stated, firmly, that the amended will was not only valid, it superseded the prior version entirely. Just like that, the estate was mine. But it didn't end there. After the ruling, Scott and Lucas were approached by officers. Fraud charges were already in motion. Apparently, Rachel had worked with forensic accountants who uncovered not just forged signatures, but shell company transactions tied to Scott and Lucas's names. My father had tried to protect his business before his death. Now I was finishing the job. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered like vultures. I wasn't interested in telling my side to the press. Not yet. My victory wasn't for headlines. It was for me. But the fallout back home was undeniable. My aunt, Scott's mother, left me a voicemail full of venom. You've destroyed our family. You had enough. Why did you have to take everything? I never responded. Because the truth is, they had already destroyed this family. The day they decided to manipulate a grieving man, to forge signatures and twist loyalty into opportunity, that was the day the family was broken. I was just the one who refused to play silent. The house, Dad's house, was mine again. When I walked through the front door, the sunlight hit the foyer just like it did the day we moved in when I was 10. I could almost hear him laughing from the kitchen, his voice echoing from the walls. I wasn't just back. I was home. In the following weeks, I restored everything. The staff, the business, the charities Dad supported. I even framed the amended will and placed it in his study, right where it belonged. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring what was rightfully mine and what my father had intended all along. The day of the court hearing arrived. I wore a navy blue pantsuit, sleek and tailored, my hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun. I wasn't here as the grieving niece anymore. I was here as the rightful heir, armed with evidence, purpose, and a strength that had been forged in betrayal. Opposite me sat Uncle Peter and Aunt Maureen, stiff and pale, their attorneys whispering frantically into their ears. They looked different now, less smug, more brittle. They hadn't expected me to fight. Certainly not like this. The judge entered, and the hearing began. My lawyer, Miss Coleman, stood tall and confident. She laid out the will, the signature analysis, the timeline. She presented the hidden amendment, signed, dated, notarized. She played the voicemail from Grandpa Thomas, the one he left me 2 weeks before he passed, where he clearly said, I've updated the will, sweetheart. You'll find it if you look in the old lighthouse box. You deserve everything I've built. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Aunt Maureen's face drained of color. The judge reviewed the documents carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. After reviewing the original will, the hidden amendment, and the corroborating evidence provided by both handwriting and digital forensic experts, it is this court's decision to reinstate the original intention of the deceased, Thomas Callahan. He looked directly at me. Miss Delaney Callahan is the rightful heir to the Callahan estate. My knees nearly buckled, but I held steady. I had waited so long for this moment. I thought I'd cry, or maybe shout in joy. But instead, I just breathed, deep, full, free. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about truth. As I exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed, but I ignored them. A few steps behind me, Aunt Maureen's voice called out, Delaney, wait. I turned slowly. You were never supposed to win, she said, eyes glassy, with something that looked like shame. I smiled faintly. No, I was never supposed to fight back. Outside, the sky was a deep, cloudless blue. I looked up and whispered, We did it, Grandpa. The world hadn't changed. I had. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of the old Callahan estate, my estate now. The sprawling White House sat under a golden afternoon sun, the porch swing creaking gently in the breeze, just like I remembered from childhood summers. Restoration work was nearly complete. I didn't want to sell it off like everyone expected. I wanted to honor it, not as a monument to wealth, but as a place of healing. I was turning it into a community center, offering shelter, education, and mentorship for young women who had been overlooked, underestimated, or left behind.
Just like I had been.
The lighthouse box, the one that saved everything, was now displayed in the main foyer. Not locked away, but out in the open. A reminder that sometimes what's hidden can hold the most power. One evening, as I hosted our first fundraiser gala, I saw Miss Coleman across the room. I made my way to her, hugged her tightly. "You didn't just win me a case," I whispered. "You gave me my life back." She smiled. "No, Delaney. You reclaimed it all on your own." And she was right, because I wasn't the same girl who had quietly accepted crumbs at a table meant for her. I had learned to speak up, to dig deeper, and to trust my instincts, even when everyone else told me I was wrong. In the mirror that night, I saw someone I barely recognized, strong, assured, and fully in control of her story. And it wasn't revenge that filled me. It was peace. Because justice didn't come from the court's ruling alone. It came from the journey. From rising when I had every reason to stay down. I was never just the girl who got cheated. I was the woman who rewrote the ending.